member of the co-founding member of the Maine Natural Guard, which is an organization that helps people connect the dots between militarism and harms to climate, which has become more of a mainstream issue now than these days, but when I started out doing it, it was pretty obscure. And I also work with the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, which is an international organization of scholars and activists concerned about turning space into yet another warfighting domain. I'm here with Bruce Gagnon of Brunswick, and he is the coordinator for the Global Network. We're going to team up to speak about a particular project here in Maine, which is the proposal to build a rocket launch site off the coast in Steuben, Maine. We're going to hear from Bruce first because he's going to talk about other rocket launch sites that have been built in other pristine coastal areas around the world, and what was promised to locals when that was done, and what's actually happened, facts on the ground since they were built, to give us some context for rocket launch sites. And then I'll speak briefly about the Maine situation, and then we hope to have time for discussion, question, answer, comment at the end. Does that sound okay to everybody? All right, take it away, Bruce.
Okay. Thank you for being here. The Global Network was created in 1992. At that time, I was living in Florida, just about 45 minutes away from the Kennedy Space Center. It routinely, as you know, launches rockets, and at about somewhere between 5 to 10% of the time they blow up. And when rockets are launched there, they release, as you've seen on various videos.
Mr. Derry.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thought I'd join.
Yeah, we just got
First
started.
of the conversations.
Just got started.
Yeah, a little.
So anyway, at the Kennedy Space Center, when they launch rockets, the exhaust filters down as the rocket takes off. And Kennedy Space Center is surrounded by a wildlife refuge. And the Sierra Club, over many years, has studied that situation. And they say that after each launch, there are significant killings of birds and other wildlife, fish, etc. at this place. But then also, as the rocket goes up, the exhaust also filters up into the upper atmosphere and is punching a hole in the ozone layer. And so this is becoming a problem. And we're now seeing this rush all over the world to build more launch facilities and to launch more rockets. Just the other day, I was on a Zoom call with people from the United Kingdom, because in Scotland and one or two places in the UK, there are attempts now to build rocket launch facilities. And like is always said, these are going to be civilian launches. They're not going to harm the environment. They're going to employ lots of people. And as it turns out, in every single case that we know of, this turns out to be a lie. For example, Kodiak Island in Alaska, known for its bears and its salmon and its bald eagles. I went there some years ago, and the community was organizing to try to stop the building of a rocket launch facility. And they were all told that it will only be civilian. They have a state commission that runs the entire thing, much like Maine is creating. And as it turned out, every launch there at Kodiak Island has been military. Star Wars tests and other space technology, military warfighting technology. Never has there been a civilian launch. Rocket Lab in New Zealand, built on indigenous land, indigenous people of New Zealand. The people were promised, in order to get them to agree to build this rocket launch facility on their indigenous lands, they were promised that it would never be military, that it would be civilian, that it would create jobs, and that it would not be harmful to the environment. It would create jobs, and that it would not be harmful to the environment. Every launch from Rocket Lab is now military launch, has been a military launch. It's been taken over by the military. In fact, I've seen a picture, I have this picture, of the inside of the facility, the production facility of Rocket Lab, and they have two flags, the American flag and the New Zealand flag, and Lockheed Martin now runs the operation. The people of Hawaii were asked to consider a launch facility, but they organized and so far have been able to push away those that wanted to build this rocket launch facility in their community. So I think it's pretty apparent that this entire movement to build these rocket launch facilities are suspect, and they promise one thing and then don't deliver on that promise.
So you, excuse me, you're saying like.
You mind if I?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
You would do the questions
Okay.
at the end, okay? One of the reasons why there's this explosion of rocket launch facilities is because lower Earth orbit, what they call LEO, is quickly filling up. It's becoming crowded. It's like a parking lot. There are very few parking spaces left in lower Earth orbit. So there's a rush to fill them up. And I think this is one of the reasons why, especially in the Western countries, US, NATO type countries, there's this rush to build more launch facilities because they want to fill it up before other countries can have access to it. Because one thing we know is in a Pentagon planning document called Vision for 2020, published in the late 90s, the United States, then Space Command, now called Space Force, has long said that they intend to control space and dominate space and deny other countries access to space. And in fact, at their headquarters building at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado, their logo reads Master of Space. So Elon Musk, for example, has launched 13,000 satellites into low Earth orbit. He wants to do 40,000 more. His Starlink satellites that are now visible at nighttime, a whole chain of them. Astronomers are very upset about this because these blinking satellites in space are destroying the night sky, and astronomers are not able to do their scientific work. But anyway, Musk's Starlink satellites are providing to the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian military, they're providing communication and targeting information in the war going on with Russia. And so it's our contention that virtually all satellites launched today are dual use. We're told that they're civilian, but the military buys their way into these situations. And so now we see with this increasing filling up of lower Earth orbit, countries like Russia and China, for example, are saying, hey, wait a minute, there's no regulation. It's just like the Wild West stampede here. And what makes it fair that the Western countries should have access to filling up lower Earth orbit, because whoever controls the parking spaces in lower Earth orbit are going to have advantage when it comes to wartime. So I think this is a crucial thing. One of the reasons I believe that so many of these launch facilities, virtually all of them, are turning military after their promise that they're going to be civilian, is because they run out of money. The people that build them, they might have the best intentions in the world to build, and they're going to build and they're going to launch all these rockets, but soon they need funding, right? How are they going to get funding to pay for all of these technologies that they're developing and hiring people and everything else? And so we see that they turn to NASA and they turn to the Pentagon for funding. And so I think it's pretty clear that this system is rigged from the get-go, and it's a real problem. So here in Maine now, we are experiencing this as well. So, there you go.
All right, thanks, Bruce. Did you have a question, or do you want to
just-
hold it to the end?
I was just going to ask, do you mean that does NASA consider? Do you consider NASA a civilian organization?
No.
You don't.
No. NASA has always been dual use from the very start. And because I lived in Florida so long, I worked on space beginning in 1982 in Florida until I moved here to Maine in 2003. And repeatedly, we find NASA in bed with the Pentagon launching dual-use missions. I'll just give you one example. There was a mission years ago called Clementine, ostensibly to go and study the moon. And they fired a projectile from an orbiter that was orbiting the moon to get under the moon regolith looking for water. Now, okay, that was a so-called civilian mission. But as it turns out, what they were also testing was the ability of an orbiter orbiting a planet to fire a projectile and hit another planet, in this case the moon, from orbit, to hit it in a strike. So could you not use that same technology, orbiting the Earth, for example, and then firing a projectile into the Earth, hitting a so-called enemy? So these are the kind of dual-use projects that NASA has always done from the very start. And it's important to remember that those that created the U.S. space program were the former Nazi scientists that came over after the war under Operation Paperclip, Werner von Braun and 100 of his rocket team, and they brought 100 of the V-2 rockets, and they were immediately absorbed into the Pentagon and creating military infrastructure for space technology. So, all right, go ahead.
Thank you for that question. So I'm going to bring it down to the local level here in Maine. I am a Mainer, and I'm glad that you all from away came to Maine because it's made me a better place. A lot of people come to Maine because this is the way they want to live, and they appreciate the unspoiled natural beauty and the incredible coastline and forests and rivers and lakes and streams. In my lifetime, we've moved from being able to eat trout right out of the river to, if you're pregnant, don't eat any of this trout. So I've watched industrial takeover of many of Maine's natural resources over the years, and it's an ongoing problem. We are trying to raise awareness of this rocket launch proposal because hardly anybody knows about it. The reason that hardly anybody knows about it is twofold, I think. The legislation creating the Maine Space Corporation, which is a public-private partnership, which was passed in an emergency session legislation a couple years ago here in Maine, was passed under the gavel in the Maine legislature, meaning no roll call vote, it's just unanimous. Came out of the idea committee as mixed, ought to pass, ought not to pass, because there was an amendment on it. Many of the people that objected to it said, how much is it going to cost the taxpayer? What do you mean private? Public, meaning the public funds the infrastructure and private entities make the profits. And the committee was told, we won't know how much it will cost until you pass the bill. So as taxpayers, we have some fiscal concerns right there, but really my concern is environmental. bluShift Aerospace is a rocket company, private for-profit rocket company based in Brunswick at the old Naval Air Station there, Brunswick Landing. And they are testing a rocket engine that is loud enough to wake children who are asleep out of their beds in Brunswick, rushing into the living room to ask mom and dad, what is that horrible noise, what's wrong?
Actually,
West Bath, so closer. No matter what fuel bluShift burns in its rockets, they're going to make that much noise pollution, and you're going to create greenhouse gas emissions when you burn any fuel, whether it's a petroleum-based fuel or not. And depending on where you launch your rockets into, the soot particles that are damaging the ozone layer. Remember how we all worked in our youth to fix the ozone layer that had a hole in it? Well, all these rocket launches have now again damaged the ozone layer, and the soot that in the stratospheric level lingers for a long time, longer than it does in the atmosphere. And The rocket launch site that is proposed under the Maine Space Corporation originally was slated for Jonesport. Jonesport lobster fishing community got together and said, we're putting a moratorium on this plan until we can really find out how this would impact our traditional fishing grounds here. And then at the town level did some things in municipal government to block that project going forward. Cut to the corporate press in Maine has 100% supported the idea to move this rocket launch site instead to Steuben. Steuben is on Goldsboro Bay. It is within sight of Acadia National Park. If you went to Acadia and kind of followed the coast along, heading down east, you would come to Steuben. The rockets that are proposed to be launched are about as tall as a mature white pine, so visible from Acadia National Park. And also, one of the things to keep in mind is even if rocket launches go off okay, and they just damage the fishing grounds or the seaweed harvesting grounds in the waters around them, and they just damage the ozone layer, if something goes wrong, which is fairly common with rocket launches, it's still developing technology. They fail frequently. Certainly SpaceX has had a lot of spectacular failures in the last 5 years or so. Guess what the fire suppression plan is? What do you have in place to suppress a big fire at a rocket launch site, or an airport for that matter? PFAS foam, which, as we all know, has been a huge step in the wrong direction here in Maine with well-intentioned
Lisa,
people
that's not true.
Well, excuse me.
That's
I'm going
not
to
true.
finish my talk, and then you can...
There's about four statements you made that were false.
You can hold your
Okay, please give me a chance the opportunity. I appreciate
You can hold your remarks for a minute. I'm going to finish. So this is the CEO of bluShift Aerospace. If you didn't know Sasha Berry or recognize him. So I'm sure he's going to have some information to share with us in a minute. The town of Steuben seems to be very friendly with this project. The person who is the head selectman has been quoted in the paper as saying, we're all for it. And all the headlines that you'll see in the Bangor Daily News or the Portland Press Herald or the Times Record are always going to say, bluShift selects Steuben as their rocket launch site location. The questions that I have about this is, where was the democratic process where the people, not only of Steuben, but of the surrounding coastal area, got to weigh in on whether they want a rocket launch site off the coast in Goldsboro Bay? The other question that I would have about this is, where is the environmental impact statement for building a rocket launch site? Now, the plan that I've seen is up to 34 launches a year during the season, Memorial Day to Labor Day. So that would average out to roughly bi-weekly, like every other week. A rocket as large as a white pine with a noise that can wake sleeping children launching within sight of Acadia. Again, I'm old. I was born in Maine. I've lived in Maine most of my life. This is vacation land for a reason. And it's not to come see the industrial pollution. It's to enjoy the fact that there's one corner of the U.S. that's still fairly in its natural state. I think that we would be very, very foolish to give that up. Tourism is a huge income-producing sector of our economy and has been for my lifetime. Also, fishing, lobster fishing, also seaweed harvesting are creating jobs, creating revenue, and I think would be, people in that local area believe would be pretty severely disturbed were this project to go through. So we do have a website. It is No Toxic Rockets for ME, and then not an exclamation point, but a .org, where you could sign up to get updates. You can learn more about the process where this was rushed through the legislature, and you can learn more about whether rocket launch sites will be built in Steuben or elsewhere.
And you can also, let me just add, you can also at this website see videos from these other places about Kodiak Island, about Rocket Lab in New Zealand, about Hawaii. So
About
you get it. So,
And Florida too.
My question is, will there be any hearings for public commentary on this?
I do not know. I have not heard of any. I know that a local resident of Steuben has been engaging the town council there with just that question, and he has reported that he's been silenced. They cut the mic. They tell him, we don't want to hear from you. Your comments aren't welcome. I was not there to see that, so I don't know what else has happened. Dan, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Why was LD 1923 submitted under an emergency protocol?
You would have to ask Senator Maddie Daughtry that question. She was the sponsor of the legislation. It doesn't sound like an emergency to me, but as we know, a lot of things get passed.
There's a low bar for that kind of thing.
There's a low bar for emergency.
So I just want to clarify a few things. So let's get the argument straight so that that we don't tell people lies or at least misunderstandings. So I think one big confusion, this has been a problem for me, is that the legislature was to create the Maine Space Corporation to develop the educational interests, academic interests in space and STEM, and then also develop a number of accelerators and businesses, attract new businesses to Maine and the high-tech industry, and kind of diversify what we're doing in Maine. And the other part was the launch site. The launch arm is actually in direct conflict with what my company is doing. bluShift Aerospace's intentions to do a launch site is completely separate from what the Maine Space Corporation. So I want to first clarify that when you say that it's one and the same, I certainly understand why you might misunderstand that. And I was personally concerned. I don't have control. I have a say, but I don't have a control over the Maine Space Corporation. It is a separate entity from bluShift. There are some things in terms of like education and certainly encouraging business growth, which I'm totally in league with. Creating a spaceport that might be in competition or bringing rockets that do use actual toxic fuel, I have a problem with personally. So I just want to clarify that. The other thing is, our fuel is carbon neutral. I discovered the source of my fuel on my brother's organic farm in North Yarmouth. I was on camera actually eating the fuel myself. It's non-toxic to the point where I can literally eat it. Nothing bad happens to me. It's literally the carbon that's taken out of the atmosphere while the plants are growing is the same amount of carbon released. And then the other thing is that the other thing to keep in mind is this is being launched 2 miles off the coast of Maine. So when these launch, the sound, first of all, sound travels really well in the ocean, so it should be important to keep in mind. But the sound that is produced is less than the sound on the shoreline where you have more sensitive habitats. The sound that's produced is less impactful than the ongoing marine traffic in boats, like lobster boats and fishermen. The sort of equivalent sound is equivalent to a single jet engine. In fact, I was looking at the Bar Harbor, the jets coming in and out of the Bar Harbor today. There's 20 flights coming into Bar Harbor. Some of them jets, some of them prop planes. And in fact, one of the jets, a couple of jets are coming in, are equivalent power rating as our rocket. So the reason why I mention that is the rockets, one of the ways you figure out what the sound cost or the effect of a rocket is you look at its power rating. So literally we have jets flying into Trenton and Bar Harbor every day, dozens in and out, with the same amount of power our rocket produces. And for things in nature, what's most disturbing is not short bursts of sound, but long extenuating sounds. Think boats, think jets, think planes. That's far more disruptive. And perhaps far disruptive to our shoreline is people approaching sensitive habitats in kayaks or canoes or boats and get very close, which can be even worse yet. So I want to share some of those facts. And yes, go ahead.
I'm not having my life energy taken and given to those kayaks, those boats, those jets. My life energy is being taken from me by this legislation of the 1923. And it's been given to an enterprise that I don't particularly believe in. I don't think it should typically be there. So why, in my opinion, if you can't stand on your own merits without taking something from me, I don't know you. Why do you
What
feel
are we
that you
taking
have
from
a
you?
right
Sorry.
to take from me? We've just basically made an unholy marriage with the state and private entities. I have no control. I have no say. So I don't want this relationship, regardless of if you drink your own fuel. I mean, I really don't care, but I just don't like the private-public aspect of this and how it's brought through in an emergency. Our state does a lot of things really quickly and fastly, and they don't think about it.
It took about 2.5 years,
and they
from what I
cause
understand.
problems.
It took 2.5 years. It wasn't. I know there's reason to make it sound like it happened really fast.
Do
It
you
took
know
like
why
2.5
they
years.
do emergency legislation so they can strip the
But
democratic
was the
process?
public know about it for 2.5 years? Because
No.
in the public-private
It was in the papers.
legislation,
It was
it's able to be kept secret until it's.
It was out for public comment for like 2 years. It actually got stalled and re-put in again and again. I just also want to clarify. Well, I like some of the objectives. My company is actually not associated with that, and we literally do not use toxic fuel. So part of the reason I came to this is the little title of your guys' show or the seminar is no toxic rockets for Maine. I agree with that. I think that's
Can I ask you a
par
question?
for course, but
A source of funding for your operation. Are you getting any government money?
sure we use
From
crowdfunding. We get from NASA, from we're going to get some from Space Force. We'll get some from the Maine.
Why would Space Force give you any money?
They are supporting. My understanding is the Space Force is trying to support commercial launch companies, so that our country has a diversified set of companies that can launch small satellites to space. And that's actually another point is that you brought up
the NASA funding?
you brought up a point about we're trying to raise to fill up. Hold on, I answered one question for you. I know, but I answered one question for you, and so it's my turn to ask you a question.
This is our presentation.
I know, and this
now
are we
you're
not part of the
trying
public to
filibuster.
feed back and forth?
I'd like you to answer the question.
I'll be glad to answer a question. Allow me to have one statement.
What are you going to do for NASA?
So one of the statements you made that were incorrect was that the deployment of small assets satellites to space was the United States was some sort of like rush to fill up as if it was farmland that we're trying to put all the seeds in before anybody else's. That's not the case. And I think you have merit in what you're saying, but I think you might have missed the mark. The mark is that the United States, as well as other countries, is more concerned that some other country like China or Russia or whoever, North Koreans, whatever, will take out satellites that are important to commerce, whether it's like literally GPS satellites that we can't navigate places, communication satellites, and yes, defense satellites, and the like. So the concern is that we have no way but like gigantic rockets like SpaceX rockets to replace these satellites in orbit. So I believe that the United States federal government is trying to seek ways to have multiple options to put satellites back up, should something back.
And so your company would then serve as one of these multiple options to put satellites.
I think they're trying to
for
service. They're trying to create that commodity within the whole ecosystem of the United States.
Excuse me, as timekeeper, I just want to say we only have 5 minutes left in this session.
And this woman in the yellow windbreaker's been waiting very patiently while about 5 people talked after she raised her hand.
I think
Do you remember?
I forgot.
It's probably been
I got so.
Florida. You said
Well, I did wonder if there's enough scrutiny around. I mean, the whole rocket launching thing is ridiculously, nonsensically huge at this point. And no one, are we looking at the ozone problem? We are going to lose this planet if we destroy the atmosphere. And we'll be dead long before that happens, but we're talking about every living thing on this planet. You seem very enthusiastic, very optimistic, but I think you are spouting greenwashing and fear-mongering by thinking that you can tweak Space Force. And to me, it's a total horror show that our government and the billionaires, the 3,000 of them on this planet, are so insane to not really see what the emergency is, and it's not this. So it's not a question.
And I want to say that when the bill was rushed through the legislature in Augusta, It was under the gavel, no recorded vote. They did everything they could to restrict and limit any real public debate. The public hearing that was held, as they're required to, had no real notification. So interested parties like us didn't find out about it until just a couple days before. And so, this is the process. And this is, again, what we hear from people around the world at all these different rocket launch places. It's the same MO over and over and over again. And frankly, to hear you say that you're going to get money not only from NASA but from Space Force I didn't know that. It's even more alarming than I thought. So I think we got a real serious problem here in this state of Maine.
I believe that you or someone from bluShift did testify at that public hearing when the bill was still in committee.
Yeah.
A couple of different for-private rocket or other space technology companies did testify. No testimony against the bill was heard. Now, did the committee say we're not hearing any negative testimony? No, they just structured it so nobody who was against the bill knew about it in time to testify. I just have one question, and it's maybe not even relevant, but is Maddie Daughtry your senator? Maddie Daughtry?
I believe so, yeah.
She was the bill sponsor to create the Maine Space Corp.
I do remember one gentleman, we listened to it on the internet because we didn't hear about it until the last minute, this hearing. And there was one gentleman that testified saying that he was in a position, correct me if I'm wrong on this, he was in a position to be able to get some money from the Pentagon to test like hypersonic rockets and things like that from Maine, from a launch facility if it was authorized and allowed to be constructed. So there are people beyond you, beyond your company, that want to get their hands on developing a launch facility that will fit into the military agenda. And so it's not just you and your company we're picking on here. We're picking on the larger issue. And again, we see over and over and over again. In Scotland, they haven't even decided yet to build in Scotland, but it looks like it's going to happen. And there's already signals that Lockheed Martin is going to run the operation.
I think there was already a lot with orbits.
So, pretty real. But anyway, we're out of time. Thank you all very much. We have some literature up here if you'd like to take it. Thank you for stopping.
I'm also happy to answer questions if people want to ask the source. So at least